It's the Music Universe's 7th birthday here on the Music Universe podcast. And it's Buddy on for the Music Universe with my correspondent in New York, Matt Bailey. How's it going, Matt?
Oh, I miss doing these. I hear you did one without me. I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm pretty good, and I did. I don't like doing them solo, but I did one, on Neil Peart. He was a big influence on my drumming and just music in general, and I couldn't let it go. It was a little bit after, his announcement that he passed, but I had to do it, and I know you're potentially taking a break here and there, so you might see some more solo shows from me. But for the most part, it's cool as a one-on-one with a potential guest. It's better that way.
Oh, it's great, and I'm working on some things for you too. It's just I've been incredibly busy on some other projects, and
Of course.
and I'm glad you did that one. Now, I tend to be a bit of a cynic, tend to be a bit. Not with the mainstream. Now, Neil Peart, as you say, was awesome. He was probably the best of the best, top of the line. I mean, there's a billboard in my native Pennsylvania that says "Farewell to the King," and it has him and his huge drum kit and
That's cool.
1950 whatever to 2020. And I just wonder though. It's like coming from ventriloquism. Every ventriloquist my age and younger and even a little older says they got into it because of Jeff Dunham. It seems like every drummer says they got into drumming because they saw Neil at one point or another. And I wonder at what point does he kind of become, or does that fandom and freaking out become kind of overrated? Was he really at a level that people can't achieve?
Yes and no. He was definitely one of a kind with the way he did things. He would carefully orchestrate literally every note, so to speak, every beat, every hit that he was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't really change it up too much, if at all, night after night. So I think that's a level in itself that is very hard to achieve. I'm the kind of drummer that'll just go at it, and you're not going to hear the same performance every night. He's one that you could, if you saw him on a tour and you went the next night and night after night, then you're going to see pretty much the same show. But Rush was that kind of band. They were a jam band. They enjoyed music. They enjoyed performing. They loved each other. And that level of musicianship is just, it's just unheard of. There's a lot of great guys, but to have everybody be on the same level. And Neil was more than just their drummer. He was the lyricist for the most part. He wrote about
thing people
all kinds of stuff.
Tend to forget is that he
Oh, yeah.
wrote those poems that Rush put music to. And
Right.
I feel like all this focus on how much of a beast of a drummer he was is really kind of diminutive of some of the great lyrics that he's written. I mean, you look at this big burly motorcycle guy, and then you listen to a song like Marathon, and you go, how do you reconcile the two?
Oh yeah, and his love of motorcycles was really well known if you were a Rush fan, because he would forego the tour bus and actually drive his motorcycle to each tour stop, and sometimes take photos. And he would write. He released like a photo book, I believe, of his journeys doing that. So he was an avid motorcyclist, and he just drove cross country. Most people need rest. I give it to him, like, cool, you want to go see the country in such a unique way. That's awesome. So that's cool that he did that, and I think you gotta respect that. He's Canadian, but he lived in Santa Monica, and he loved America so much that he would travel and just see the different sites and stuff. Very, very cool. Very cool guy too. There was a story I was reading from I can't think of the guy's name, but he was a fan, and he just happened to run into him in West Virginia, I believe, on one of his excursions. he sat down and said that Neil was super cool, invited him to sit down, and actually sparked sparked the conversation, asking him if it was a bit of an bit overdoing it with his bike or something like that. And he goes, isn't it a bit overdoing it on the drums? And Neil's like, touche. So pretty cool guy. And they struck a conversation and sat there and ate lunch and then, went on their ways.
Yeah, and I would love to read an interview about his songwriting. I don't know that he ever talked about that. And this from the guy who hated meet and greets. I think because he hated the artifice and how artificial meet and greets were, and he wouldn't do them. He could not do them.
He didn't. He's a bit of a recluse in that sense. I have some Rush videos, and Geddy and Alex meet with people, and Neil was nowhere to be found. He's backstage warming up for 30 minutes to an hour before the show. So it was very rare that you got to meet Neil, and if you did, he was apparently super personable and super cool, and it was just heartbreaking to hear what happened. I was in utter shock.
I didn't even know he had brain cancer. I didn't know he had.
No one did. No one, unless you were inside his inner circle of friends and family, and they were all asked not to say anything.
Yeah.
So you got to give it to those guys at Mike Portnoy formerly of Dream Theater, and then with the Winery Dogs, a monster of a drummer as well, and some other people did not say a word about it, and that just tells you what kind of class act those guys are as well. They could have broke this news, and they're not like that. They're very genuine, cool guys, and I've never met any of them, but you can tell they are, especially if they're able to keep that quiet. I mean, just the biggest drummer of our time right now, and just finding out that news and being a friend and a fellow colleague in some ways, it's just heartbreaking.
It is, and so I know you did a whole episode on it. I don't want to rehash it, but those are just my thoughts, and I meant no disrespect when I said the overrated thing. It's just because he was so much more than this godlike drummer.
Oh yeah,
the outdoorsy spirit, the soul of a poet. So he will be missed, and what a sad way to kick off 2020. But 2020 does mark your 7th year doing this site, and it's cool to see what it's become.
When I first started it, our first post was January 24th, 2013. It was about Husker Du getting an expanded reissue for Record Store Day. Unfortunately, some website issues were happening right after I posted it. It took us 4 days to get it figured out, and then we started with more stuff. When I first founded this site, I stepped away from playing music and decided, what? I see people reporting news. It's like, I've got to jump into this more. I get excited when I see my favorite artists releasing new music, and why not be a part of that and get to report it? So I started the website, and it started with being pretty much just a review site and a what we call notable releases, just reporting on release info. And then it didn't take long. It started branching into what it is today, a full-fledged news site. I realized there was more stuff to enjoy about it, more stuff to report, and I couldn't just let it be just news, release news and info, and then just my thoughts on songs and albums. And a friend of mine too, Ryan, that started it with me. He's inactive right now, but most everything at the very forefront of the site. So let's say about 4 weeks, it's all pretty much release info and reviews. In fact, one of our first articles is titled, "Would You Buy a Country Record by the Boss?" Nothing happened with that yet. But then we started branching off to tour info, um, and more news info. Original member ZZ Top dies. That was uh, 3 weeks into it. That's obviously not what we started with in that direction. And then unfortunately, Mindy McCready passed away less than a month after we started the site. So that was breaking news. I remember being at Disneyland for the first time when Ryan texted me about it. I'm like, oh, get that out. So we went a little different direction than it initially started, but I'm excited. We've got to meet some really cool people, interview some really awesome stars and some up and comers, and it just kind of branched into to what it is, and we couldn't do it without everybody visiting. Even if you're a first time visitor or even listener to this podcast, you have contributed, and we appreciate it.
Really do. It's been an adventure. I know I met you in my last year of college, towards the end of that first semester of the last year of college. You called me back. I bugged you for like a month.
You did.
Emails, Facebook messages,
You
more
did,
emails.
yep.
I don't think I could find your phone number. You do have a Google Voice for the business. I don't know that I found it. But you finally called me. I'm like, okay, give this jerk a try.
Well, because at the time I was getting bombarded with, stuff with people trying to be a part of it, and I was just just one of those guys, And then you just kept bugging me, and something told me to reach out, and here we are.
Well, because you probably got those people that were like, hey, can I do this? And then they moved on to the next thing. You were my focus for one reason. Other than having seen your stuff around, you got to interview Garth.
Yeah, that was around the time you contacted me.
So I was like, he must be pretty legit if he's in on the Garth stuff. I want to.
That made me feel more legit. The fact that Garth's people accepted where we are, or where we were at that time, which is a little over 3 years ago. Where we were at the time, not being The Boot, a Taste of Country, Ultimate Classic Rock, Billboard, so and so. We're not a name brand, a household brand name, and the fact that they let me in really meant a lot, and it was really super cool to meet them and hang out, and I thanked them for allowing me to do it. And then again, they allowed me to cover the dive bar tour when it hit Bakersfield. I bugged them, you bugged them for me, and they were super cool, and it was cool to get to talk to them before being shooed away by the people there that didn't want me hanging out where the band was going to be coming out.
Mm-hmm.
It's the biggest superstar in the world, so I can understand. But at the same time, they know me, and they're like, I think you're being called over there. I'm like, yeah, they don't want me hanging out here. But, it was cool just to get to chat with them again, and for them to just always remember us. That's for anybody that has worked with us, and, being tied to the record labels and publicists. We just thank everybody for taking a chance with us and allowing us to be on your list, and the artists we've got to cover, the shows we've gotten to cover, artists we've gotten to interview. It takes a lot of behind the scenes work to make this thing happen, and we like to be the first, but it's not always best to be the first, and we've learned that. But we try to be as exclusive as we can as well, with often you and I just scouring the internet, or we've heard something that we've been able to confirm, and that is what I mean by making it being the first, not hearing gossip. We're not a gossip site. Now, not to say we haven't reported on it, but I like to get confirmation on stuff before we publish it. And that's what's hard these days, is to know what's real and what's not. And, those that visit and, know that we're legit, they may like, well, who is this? I'll see people click on my personal social media links to read more about me, and that's great. That's cool. But it's about the brand here, and we like to build it, and that's kind of where this podcast came from.
Exactly. And like I said, my first thing that I did for you, we talked for like half hour, and I said, I'm headed out the door. I'm going to a Trans-Siberian Orchestra concert. This was around Thanksgiving, before Thanksgiving. And you said, oh, do you want to write about it? I said, sure. So my first review wasn't a press seat. It was a show I was going to anyway. And there we are.
Yeah. Now, we don't, we don't always get the press seats, but we still decide sometimes to write about it. And that just, I think that's fun to do, just to be able to attend a show and enjoy it. And, sometimes that's what I want to do too. I just want to enjoy the show. I don't want to make notes. So if I go on my dime, I'll often not cover it just because I want to enjoy it. Not that I don't enjoy it any other way, but, I've got a job to do when I'm there, and I enjoy that very much. So it's fun to visit concerts and, getting to experience some of this stuff, because it's a blast, to get to see artists maybe you haven't seen before, or maybe you haven't seen in a while, or maybe you just saw last year. You've seen Billy Joel how many times now?
Four. Almost said five.
Maybe five coming
well,
up.
If I do it again in September, October, that's become the yearly tradition. I started in 2017, went last year, went this year, and I went last year. Yeah, I've gone. Yeah, I took my friend Quinn last year. 2017, I took Max, and then this year I took a friend named Bradley. I try to spread that wealth because they always give me two, and I got a lot of friends who are big Billy Joel fans in New York. That's like breathing,
Oh yeah.
So
you can't find a non-Billy Joel fan in New York.
And surprisingly enough, there's a lot of country music fans. And so last night, or earlier last week, if you're hearing this, but as the time we're recording this, last night, I went to see Little Big Town at the Apollo Theater. Now, let's not tiptoe around it. The Apollo Theater is an African-American venue. It's steeped in African-American culture, African-American history, hip-hop, rock, blues, Jimi Hendrix, Aretha Franklin, soul. Little Big Town, I guess, either rented it or was booked in as part of their, I'm sure UMG rented it as part of their album launch, because they were doing Carnegie Hall, and then they did 2 nights at the Apollo. And you would have thought it was the Ryman. I mean,
really?
It was just awesome.
Well, that's cool to hear, because in country music, New York really isn't that synonymous with it. It has in recent years, but for the most part, for the longest time, they didn't even have a country station. And they're the number one market in the country.
Yeah, and I think Garth's drawing in, nearly a million too. People in Central Park proved that New York City is a venue for country music, and I think I could tell you why. New York City, like a lot of places, like a lot of big metro areas across the country, it's not really a hometown to a lot of people. It's a lot of people move here for work, for other reasons, from Middle America to start their careers, excel at their careers. And so I think country music is a way of staying connected to their hometown. I know it certainly is for me because of what I grew up on. Even though they're here in this big concrete jungle, that can become a lot. It's quite the contrast between the pace here and when you go home. When I go home for a day or two to Pennsylvania. So all of that to say is the fan base moves here. I don't know I've never met anybody who's grown up in New York loving country music, but I know people that moved here, that it's a part of them, and it's a part of their family and the fabric of of who they are, and that's why it appeals. I mean, people were singing Girl Crush last night at the end of that concert. You would have thought you were somewhere in a cornfield, where the stereotypes of where you would find country music. So, and you being
Right.
from Missouri and but living in the Los Angeles metro area, down in Bakersfield, I think you can kind of identify with that story. It's part of your identity, and it doesn't leave you when you leave the place that formed you.
It doesn't, and I don't know if you even knew how I got into my into country music. Did I ever tell you that story? So this, if I didn't, this would be new to you.
Yeah.
I grew up listening to rock. My dad was a rock and roller, and my first concert, I was 4. It was Van Halen. Of all the times I wanted to leave, a drum solo. Go figure, right? So I had earmuffs on, and I wanted to leave. So we left. Then, I don't know, around 91, I guess, my aunt calls me, and she goes, of course, my whole family was rock. My aunt calls me, and she goes, hey, I started listening to country music. I'm like, oh, brother. Like, there was just one rock station I just listened to all the time. We never turned it off back home in St. Louis. And I'm going to give them a shout out. It's KC95. They've been rocking St. Louis for like 50 years, and they're awesome. So I listen to them whenever I'm back there. So she told me this, and I go, well, what are you listening to? She goes, well, your cousin let me hear Garth Brooks. So I, at the time we had tapes. So I taped, like 5 or 6 of my favorite songs from this one album. I go, okay, well, I'll take a listen. It was Rope in the Wind.
Mm-hmm.
And that got me. I'm like, oh, this is good. My dad was mad. He was just mad because he didn't understand country. And so he wasn't happy, but he supported it. And then it was just country. I started watching CMT. I discovered that. And then my love for Reba came when I saw Take It Back on CMT in 92. Instantly went out with another one of my aunts, so they were sisters, and looked for the tape at the time. I didn't have CDs yet, and wasn't out yet. So I got Whoever's in New England, and then Rumor Has It, and then eventually It's Your Call came out with Take It Back, and I've been hooked ever since. So it was because of those two artists, mostly Garth, and I told Garth this during my interview. When I interviewed him, because he was actually interviewing me at first. I was shocked. I told him that story, and he loved that. He thought that was super sweet. But that's how I got into country, and then I wanted to move to Nashville. And my dad's like, "You're not a country drummer. You're a rock," because drums were not real prominent in country as far as the way I play. And then I would go back and forth. I still loved rock, but it was more classic rock that I was into more than the modern stuff. And I finally discovered what I loved, and it was late 80s into the whole 90s country era, and then classic rock. So we are what they call the Nashville of California. Bakersfield, Buck Owens, Merle Haggard, Dwight Yoakam. I've heard he has a place here, although I haven't run into him yet. It's great. It's a good country town, and there's a lot of rock here too. But when I moved to Nashville in 2006, I didn't realize how much rock was there.
Yeah.
The rock band Cinderella was based out of Madison, Tennessee, which was a suburb of Nashville. And I don't know if you'll remember the band Winger, but Kip Winger,
Yeah.
I believe, no, my bad, Mark Slaughter from the band Slaughter, was running the booking, I believe, at one of the clubs down there, the Wild Horse Saloon. Yeah, he was running the Wild Horse Saloon. And then he'd go tour when the band got gigs. So, it just shows you how much hard work it is for these guys to have to take a day job, while their bands were successful, a decade or two before that. And then they kind of, Nirvana killed that style of music. And then they have to go do other things while they're still doing the band. So, they moved out to LA with a rock band that I was in, and, we had our run, and then Bakersfield it is, So, didn't realize the country connection here till years after living here, because I was very bitter about moving here. I didn't want to do it, but I did. And, LA is where the scene is for me. I'm from a small town, and Bakersfield's not that small, but compared to Nashville, compared to LA, there's not the fun stuff that I call, the industry and the TV and film studios that I enjoy as well are there. And, so it's a good 2-hour drive, but, we make the most of it.
And I'm sure in Bakersfield
cover a lot of shows.
There's small pockets where you can feel secluded and kind of like you're in a small town. I don't think unless you get up to California wine country, you're ever going to be in a really rural area in Southern California.
There's some spots. I mean, to get to LA, and big reason I don't in the winter a lot because of the mountains. You actually go 6,500 feet up, and they will close it down if it gets too slick with snow and ice. So,
oh wow,
it has happened. I've nearly been stuck in it before. Last February, I went to meet a friend from Nashville in LA. We did a quick photo shoot and hung out for a little bit. Went around the Hollywood Hills. About 4:00 in the afternoon, it's raining. I'm on my way back, and it's dark. Snowing as I got higher and higher, and I literally had to call my mom in Missouri, like, hey, I need you to look up traffic conditions, and this is what you type in to find it, and tell me if it's closed, because I can barely see anything. I got over it, and about an hour later they closed it.
Oh,
I would have been sleeping. Yeah, right. I would have been sleeping in my car on the mountains, because they'll do that. Mm-hmm. So I try to avoid going down there as much as possible during the winter months, but it happens. If there's a show that I get to go cover or something, I'll keep an eye on the weather, and then hopefully committing to it will foresee any weather conditions so I don't have to cancel it. But it has its advantages, I guess.
Certainly. So in the few minutes remaining that we have, I just want to tell you a little bit more about the show last night. It was really Little Big Town. They don't have a big sound, and I think this goes back to what I was saying with Trisha Yearwood. They did really well in the small arena I saw them in over a year ago in 2018, March of 2018. Geez, 2 years ago now, it'll be soon. They did really, really well. But here, in a small space like the Apollo, 1,500 seats, and I'm sure, you get up to 5,000, Radio City, Carnegie Hall, it's kind of the same, because it's not that cavernous. It really fit. It really, their style of music, their, as I said in the review today, ethereal area of modern country music, where they're kind of just focusing on lyric more than melody, although they get some great earworms. Wine, Beer, Whiskey is just awesome. And of course, Painkiller. I love the Painkiller, because that's all earworms on that album. But these last two, The Breaker and Nightfall, it's more subdued. It's more lyrics. Breaker had Better Man as their breakout hit. Now The Daughters is awesome. You sit. I hate to call them adult contemporary country, but that's almost what they are. You sit and listen to them, and it impacts you more than a dance tune ever could, because of the harmonies, because of the 30-plus year relationships. They're just awesome, and I'll go see them anytime that I can. My taste does lean more towards, let's get to day drinking, let's get to Boondocks and all the ones that they know they have to do. But you sit and you listen, you can really appreciate their artistry. And I hope, as they play the venues they're going to play, that this music fits in those homes. I hope they aren't just playing big arenas because that's what they can play because they're a name attraction. I hope they are playing venues that the music that respects the music. Because again, with Trisha Yearwood, blew me away at the town hall, and A Little Big Town blew me away at the Apollo. I think more than they did in a cavernous arena, and I would almost wager to say that the show in the arena was more like a festival style because they didn't have equal billing. Little Big Town was certainly the headliner, but on the poster it was all of them all together. It wasn't like Little Big Town and then a picture of Midland in the middle and then Casey Musgraves down in the corner. They were all together. Yeah. It was a package tour with Little Big Town as the headliner. So they filled the arena off on the backs of those three names, and certainly Little Big Town could fill them, once or twice over on their own name. But this smaller arena, the smaller theaters rather, really fit the music, and I'm a big proponent of when the music fits the venue and not the egos of the band.
Of course. And I think that's a big thing too, is so much goes into production these days. Not that it didn't before, but everything is about production, and some things are overproduced. So when you can take a band that has a lot of producing done to it and then kind of strip it down to a venue like that and they still sound great, that just tells you how great they are, really.
Exactly. And I have to admit, Wine Beer Whiskey is the only song off the album that I bought. I listened to the whole thing. They sent me a press copy, and it's wonderful. It's just not, the album is not something I'd listen to on the subway. It's something I'd listen to on a quiet night at home in a really pensive mood. And it's an incredible album, but it has its place. This is not like Painkiller, where, if you're angry, you're going to listen to Save Your Sin, or if you're in a party mood, you're going to do Stay All Night or Day Drinking. This is almost like a concept album. The same with The Breaker.
I was about to ask you that.
It really is word driven, and I think we have a habit now. I say almost a concept album because I think we have a habit now of calling albums that are lyric driven concept albums, almost to sort of dog whistle that it's not listenable because the melodies aren't catchy. No, it's very listenable. You just have to be really into the lyric, and I think the lyric is what country music is about. Country music is the home of the killer lyric, and they hit the nail on the head over and over. I mean, Sugarcoat, Trouble with Forever. I mean, they took the philosophy of Girl Crush, which is just turn a phrase and contextualize it in a way nobody else would think to do.
Yeah.
And did it over and over and over on this album, and it's amazing. It really is awesome.
Yeah, and people, I think, get concept album confused. I honestly think they always know what that means, but that's when every song has the same underlying theme. So it kind of you kind of piece it together. Sometimes they'll run together as well.
Yeah.
And so when the tracks skip, you don't always know that, hey, this is the next song. That makes me want to hear it. I'm not too big of a fan of like the poppy, overproduced stuff, but right. I might have to check this out.
And if there is a theme, and I think it does fall in that category, if not squarely, because there is a theme of sort of the regrets of life and either not moving through life with those regrets or looking back and seeing where you went wrong, which is where Sugarcoat is. Trouble with Forever is kind of like an Even Though I'm Leaving from Luke Combs, but a little bit more pensive and a little bit more like, wow, relationships really aren't forever, no matter what they are. And then you have something that is catching fire, and that is this Two Daughters, which is just, I'm not even going to tell you what the hook is. You have to go and listen to it. Or it's The Daughters. I keep calling it Two Daughters. It's The Daughters. Mm-hmm. And it's like, wow, this really is about humanity and what is society teaching, not just young girls, but young people of any sex, of any gender, of any race. Yeah, in that regard, it is a concept album. But it's something great. I hope for the next one they get back to something like a Painkiller, which to me, maybe it's kind of just because where I came into the fold, other than Boondocks, maybe for me, that's why I consider it the breakout album, because it's where I kind of discover them. But I think for them too, it was the first time where they could kind of get away from doing covers in their live sets and really had a great album of material to draw from, and they've just built and built and built upon that in these last two albums. Nightfall is kind of, in many ways, the great successor to the great hybrid, rather, of Painkiller and Wanderlust, which was the thing that Pharrell Williams produced for them. That was basically just a fun little throwaway EP pop album. So they're learning, and you can see them carving out their niche, and it is just a wonderful journey to be on as a fan and as a journalist covering them.
You know, I remember I was just graduated high school, and Ryan and I decided to take our own senior trip, and we took it to Nashville, and they had a show on CMT, you might remember, called Most Wanted Live.
Yep.
And it filmed at Opry Mills Mall at the Gibson Showcase, and they were the artists and the guest artists for that live episode, and we got to meet them afterward, and I've got an autographed picture of them at 8x10. They were on Monument Records. They actually got dropped, and then Capitol picked them up some years later. So they got a second chance that most artists don't get, especially even in the early 2000s like that.
Well, they were road dogs. I mean, they did not stop. Their original fan club president, as I understand it, drove them around to open for Keith Urban. They didn't have a driver. They didn't have a staff, and I think they had that opportunity. And the fan club president drove the van so that they could open for Keith Urban. Either that or they made it sound like they were stalking Keith Urban. But I think they were
Could be
opening
both.
for him.
But yeah, I'm so glad to hear that they have that success, because they have beautiful harmonies, and they were super nice then. That was like 2002. So that tells you, they've come a long way since then. They don't have a whole lot of albums during that time frame, but I know that they were dropped and then picked up, and Keith is on Capitol Records. So I don't know the backstory. Maybe he had something to do with helping that, but that's super cool, and that's a story I did not know about them. So
well, here's the thing. There's been this Twitter thing going around about how radio stations get flack for playing two female artists back to back,
BS.
and then they can't even do a Little Big Town or a Lady A next to each other. You can't do a Miranda Lambert and then a Little Big Town, and certainly not a Little Big Town where Karen or Kimberly are leading our lead vocals. And I'm wondering, that makes no sense. First of all, that's BS, and that needs to change. But
yeah,
it brought up an interesting point that Little Big Town showcases something else rare in they actually showcase two things, one related and then one's a tangent. Is that there are two men in the group who are totally in touch with their emotional, vulnerable, dare I say, feminine side, because they're singing backup to songs from these girls about heartbreak over men, and they're singing the gendered lyrics to harmonize.
Right.
And I think, it's such a subtle thing, but it adds a layer, and it adds the context and the tone and the soul that there is a feminine quality to Little Big Town, even though it's half and half. And I think that is quite wonderful, and I think even Garth would agree with that. So, and the other thing that you just don't see, I mean, Garth has Johnny Garcia and Robert Bailey. Maybe I'm making too much of a generalization here, but the band for Little Big Town is at least 50%, because there's only four backing musicians, African American. It's a mixed race band, which very rare in country. And I wonder, the journalist in me has to wonder what kind of conversations go on behind the scenes, especially when the band has to play the Deep South and even the middle states like Tennessee and Missouri, because sadly in 2020 that's still a risk, and I applaud them for it.
I would like to think we're over that, but times show us that unfortunately we're not. I remember when I was listening to country music, again in the 90s, Charlie Pride was the only black artist.
Yeah.
And I really didn't know who he was. He was a little before the music that I was into. And then, Darius Rucker really brought that out when he left Hootie and the Blowfish, and they did their, I guess they kind of disbanded for a while, and he went country. I thought that was super cool to see that. Like, good. It's a good mix of, not really a good mix, but at least there's some crossover in that aspect, because we're in 2020. There should never be the race card played anywhere. And unfortunately, people are probably wondering about that as well when they hit some of those.
Well, what
towns.
I will say, and this will kind of wrap the conversation here and drive home my point, is playing the Apollo, seeing them at the Apollo, it was kind of cool. It was really cool knowing how many African American artists had played there, how that had played a central role in shaping the culture of Harlem. Aretha, like I was saying, Aretha Franklin, Etta James, James Brown, just so many wonderful, powerful, soulful artists. And then you have some of these songs on Nightfall are pure soul. I mean, like Trouble with Forever. Another one, the name is escaping me right now. Forever and a Day from Philip, that Philip does. It's just, and then to see them all lined up, black backing band with white country music artists, knowing that country music comes from black music at the Apollo Theater, that was awesome. And it made me proud to be a music journalist. And that's one of the real highlights of why last night was so cool.
That's awesome, dude. That's super cool to see that. The other thing, touching on them, and it's sort of the same way with, not as much with Lady Antebellum, but that there's 4 people, obviously, 2 men, 2 women in Little Big Town, and most of the singles are female fronted.
Mm-hmm.
And that, like I said, Lady A isn't as, it's a good mix, I think, with them. And I was really surprised to hear how many female-fronted songs come from Little Big Town. And I think that's great, too, because that just helps that diversity in country music. And unfortunately, radio's got this stupid no rule, they say. Most of them are like, oh, that's not a rule. Somebody made that up.
Unwritten rule.
Unwritten rule. But I worked in radio before, and I was told in a small group of stations, do not play 2 women back to back. Like, why? We just don't do that. Really? That's stupid. I did it just to piss them off. I do it sometimes because I thought that was stupid. Why not? Because there's too few of them and they sound the same.
I would just never play men back to back. I would go man, woman, man, woman, man, woman. And at the end of the day, what does it even matter anymore? It's music.
It should have never mattered to begin with. There's so many great women. And when I worked at a place locally, and I'll keep their name unmentioned, I was talking to one of the DJs, and I said, you guys don't play Reba anymore. She goes, well, our playlist, they started going through and just deleting everything. I go, what do you mean? They just start deleting all of her songs out of there. Like, really? Why? Oh, they have to make room for the new artist coming. I thought that was shitty,
I completely agree.
Why? I get music and radio maybe in a different state than it was 20 years ago when, she was on top of the world. And I'm not just saying this about her. I'm saying it, Patty Loveless, Martina McBride, Winona, the Judds.
Tanya Tucker.
Which you never hear. all these artists that are great and they're soulful, they're real. I'll put that out there. You don't hear them, but you don't also hear Casey Musgraves on radio. She's too real, I guess. And it's just sad that you have to go through and limit the same 10 to 12 artists. And it really annoyed me too that every hour I'd hear the same artist. It would be a different song, but it'd be the same artist. I'm like, really? Come on. And I get they base it on what the fans, listeners want, but I'm just not understanding that. Maybe because I'm not in the R&D area of radio, research and development, that I don't understand it. But as a music fan, put journalist aside, put musician aside, as a fan, I want to hear diversity, and I could care less if 2 songs, 3 songs by women were played back to back. In fact, if I operated radio stations, I would probably do hours on end of women only.
Yeah.
Just to get it out there.
And we can have another conversation on this. This could be a whole other podcast.
Oh, it probably will be.
It could be. But I will say, it's kind of funny because the most popular country DJs are women. Why? Because there's a very famous quote, okay? This is getting a little inside baseball, but it's a very famous quote, that everything in life is about sex, except sex. Sex itself is about power. We can examine the second half of that quote at a later date. But everything in life about sex. Why are women the DJs at country music? Because you need the vessel through which to fawn over the male artists. Male artists are packaged deals, right? Images, sex symbols, etc. You need the women to be the introductory point at radio to get the female fans interested in the male artists. It's so totally backwards and chauvinistic, and I hope that in 2020 we can rectify that, and that going forward, as Music Universe celebrates its 7th birthday, we will be a voice for all music and all artists in country music as well.
Yeah, let's make it all genres. I mean, there's a lot of pop artists, and they don't have those silly rules.
Exactly.
Why is it only in country? Is it the twang?
Again, that's another episode, and I would love to do that with like a guest who could talk to that, because I'm actually very interested in that. But do you know we've been on here for almost an hour, man?
Yeah. We gotta wrap this up. We said 30 minutes, but
that's always a
like
lie.
Tangents.
That's always a big lie.
That's just kind of our goal is, hey, let's do 30 minutes, but we're going to see where it takes us, because we enjoy this and we enjoy you guys, and we want you to reach out to us as well. You can always hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at the Music Uni, or you could look me up at Buddy, and the last name is IAHN, so the handle is BUDDYIAHN. We also have Matt at Talk for Two, and he's on Facebook and Instagram there as well. So love to hear you guys, love to hear from you. If you guys have stories, you can always share them with us. We're always trying to stay on top of it as well, so we can share breaking news as it happens, although we aren't just sitting in front of our computers all day, unfortunately. So we do miss it as breaking sometimes, but we do bring it to you, and we're glad you guys have tuned in to the website and are tuning into the podcast. We thoroughly enjoy doing it.
Thanks for a great 7 years, and here's to 70 more.
Cheers, Matt.
All right, signing off, I'm Matt Bailey.
And I'm Buddy On for the Music Universe podcast. Thanks for listening.